Hey everybody, I am going to try to do my best to talk through how I use the NGSS elements from a framework and the evidence statements to populate our mastery scales. And it does not work in a really clean way every time that certain pieces always go in complex skills or the science and engineering practices, and certain pieces always go in the DCI or basic or the CCCs. But I'm going to kind of walk through how I broke down this particular standard and where pieces went. This is just my thinking, and I mean, I don't know. This is how it logically goes for me, and maybe this is one that we talk about later on. I don't know, but I'm just going to walk through my thinking and how I organized it in terms of my complex and basic skills, and how I decided to bullet everything. So for this, I have it a side by side. Here's my mastery scale, and here is my NGSS with my evidence statement below. I do not do this way when I am making my scale. For the purposes of this right now, I have it here for everybody to see, but I have to print out the standard with I have to print this out in hard copy, and then I have to mark this up and actually write over here where I think it goes, and I then go back and, I might copy and paste, but honestly it takes probably less time for me to go in and actually type it in over here. So I just have to think that way. So for me, every single scale, I have to have a hard copy. If you don't work that way, that's fine, but for me, I have to actually highlight and process that way. So for us today, I have it here to see side by side. So when I look at the standard, I have to go and see what it's actually telling me to do. And with this one, plan and conduct an investigation to provide evidence that feedback mechanisms maintain homeostasis. I look at the clarification statement, and I understand here that it's also telling me examples of investigations could include heart rate response to exercise, blah, 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 blah. It means that it doesn't have to. So I then look and I see, okay, well, my disciplinary core ideas include feedback mechanisms maintain a living system's internal conditions with a certain within certain limitations and mediate behaviors allowing it to maintain blah, 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 blah. I go down and also see feedback mechanisms can encourage through positive feedback or discourage negative feedback what is going on inside the living systems. I also see that we've got our structures and functions topic, and we've got our stability and change. Feedback can stabilize or destabilize a system. I know also that my science and engineering practices is planning and carrying out our investigations. Normally, these are going to be really similar. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to my observable features of the student performance by the end of the course. I usually will just gloss over my big ideas. So identify the phenomenon under investigation, identify the evidence, planning for the investigation, collecting data, refining the design, and that's all I have there. So right off the bat, I am looking at these first two. My hunch is that 3, just from how these are set up, my hunch is usually that 3, planning for the investigation, is going to be, I'm going to put it in the blue simply because of the way this one is laid out. So I'm going to go and spend a little bit of time in 1 and 2 to see where this might fit. Student describes the phenomenon under investigation, which includes the following idea, that feedback mechanisms maintain homeostasis. I'm going to look at my basic skills that I've already plugged in, and then I'm also going to look at 2, identifying the evidence to answer the question. Student develop an investigation plan and describe the data that will be collected and the evidence to be derived from the data, including changes and responses. So, okay, I automatically go, well, we're talking about creating a plan, developing an investigation plan, which makes me think, okay, science and engineering practices and the planning and carrying out. But this is going to that cross-cutting concept. So I'm thinking about, and I'm looking at the observable language, that the number one sends me to DCI. I'm identifying the phenomenon under investigation, which includes feedback mechanisms maintain homeostasis. All I'm doing here is identifying and describing the phenomenon. I don't have to do anything other than identify it. So that's putting me in DCI land. I, for the purposes of this, am going to identify the phenomenon, and I'm going to describe the phenomenon idea. Feedback mechanisms maintain homeostasis. That's basic level. I can just be exposed to it, whatever. I'm really not necessarily doing anything other than having an opportunity to know background information. Don't even necessarily know what that looks like. Where the actual exploration is going to come is with that cross-cutting concepts, and perhaps that DCI is going to come kind of through the back door with the cross-cutting concept, with the student having the opportunity to identify the evidence that they find with this phenomenon. And this is how I put this in here with this plan, the student developing the investigation following a question, following this inquiry. So I believe that I would put this here. So for the purposes of this, I feel like this plan falls in with the basic skills under our cross-cutting concept of identifying evidence. The student, so if you see that here, identifying evidence, the student develops an investigation plan. The student develops an investigation plan. I've done just a short piece of student develops an investigation plan. I've said they describe the data to be collected, and I've also given a second bullet here with they describe and they collect evidence derived from the data, and they're going to mark the changes and the responses, which in this case are homeostasis. And I've reduced all of that, into this. The B section, students describe why the data will provide information relevant to the purpose of the investigation. The next portion, the planning, I've taken all of this and I've placed it in this area here. So all of this portion is from the science and engineering practices, and I have put planning for the investigation in bold, and then I have in the investigation plan, which comes from this portion here, I have taken a shorthand because I don't know that we have to be as wordy as it is here. In the investigation plan, students describe how change is measured and identified, how response is measured or identified, how stabilization, destabilization is measured, identified, whether investigation is conducted individually or collaboratively, which is here. And I think I left this out, and I need to go back and put that in. This needs to be experiment procedure. Let's see. How would I do this? Experimental procedure, minimum numbers of different systems that would generalize results, evidence derived from data. I would perhaps say, okay, that took me a second. I went ahead and this was like pretty chock full, and I can't believe I left that one out. But the this one dealt with procedures, the procedure, the minimum number of different systems, factors that would affect them, what would allow for generalization of results, evidence derived from data, and identification of limitations of the precision of data to include types and amounts. I mean, that one's a big one. So all of these pieces, that is huge in terms of what will be part of the investigation. Then I have the data collection and what the student will evaluate in their investigation, and then the refinement if necessary. This again was part of the science and engineering practices. I don't know if we leave it there and we just take it out and have it as part of where it's linked back to the evidence statements here. I don't know, I'll leave it there and we can talk about it later. But anyway, that is the way that I go about thinking through how to take the evidence statements and put it here. I don't know if we even want to have a conversation about, do we change the color of any language evidence, like language that we put in from the evidence statements. I don't know if that makes sense for us to do. Maybe that's too much, but that's the way that I think through it. I think that it makes sense to me to see the language of the three strands here. I think it makes sense to see the language of the strand and then the language of the evidence statements in here broken down, but done so in a way that it's bulleted and easy for the eye to follow. The way that it's written over here to me it's a lot. So anyway, that's the way I see it. Again, sometimes all of it will fall here in the complex skill. For this one, the way that I see it, it breaks down into the disciplinary core idea right here, and into the cross-cutting concept here, and then the bulk of it, because it's planning for and then carrying out the investigation, where it falls here. that's then where I see it going. So the carrying out the investigation is that collection of data. Anyway, that's my thinking on it.